I'm sorry, bro. It's late. I'm tired. Can I have 2 tacos? What do you mean, can I have 2 tacos? I just finished telling you, I am not a Mexican. I am Greek. I do not sell taco. I sell gyro. Gyro? And then I remember seeing writing on the front of the cart, and I just thought it was like the guy's name or something, right? I was like, it spells it out. G-Y-R-O. Gyro. He got all pissy. It is not a gyro. It is gyro. That shit says gyro. It is gyro. Bro, I'm tired. It's late. What is a gyro? It's like a taco. Give me 2.
Good morning. It's Friday, Fight Song Friday, March the 13th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, motivation, meditation, and the Cold War. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, Varney and Company.
Take it away.
Hey, good morning, Maria. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's the inflation indicator that we are told the Fed likes to use. Yet the Personal Consumption Expenditure Price Index, PCE. Here it is. In February, the index went up 0.3%. Over the past year, it is up 2.8%. That suggests inflation is just a little cooler. The other number to watch is the price of oil. President Trump has taken sanctions off Russian oil. He wants to get as much supply on the market as possible. No reports of tankers being attacked in the Straits overnight. Oil holding steady at $93 a barrel. Regular gas now averages $3.63 a gallon. But if you go to California, you will pay $5.41 for a single gallon of regular. Stocks up in pre-market trading. Look at this. The Dow in the green to the tune of 200 points. S&P up 30. NASDAQ up about 100. Bitcoin moving to 72,800 this morning. Interest rates fairly steady. The 10-year Treasury yields 4.25% almost. The 2-year, 3.71%. There it is. Gold below $5,100. No, just moved above it. $5,126 an ounce. More developments in the war. A U.S. KC-135 refueling plane crashed in Iraq. 4 dead. The Pentagon says it was not brought down by hostile or friendly fire. The Iranians are using fake video as propaganda. They're posting shots of an aircraft carrier, one of ours, on fire. Totally false. Secretary of War Hegseth, critical of media coverage. He describes Iran as increasingly desperate, and he says Ayatollah Khomeini is injured. The Straits of Hormuz remain effectively closed. Supreme Leader Khomeini says they will stay closed. The Straits are emerging as Iran's most powerful weapon. We will editorialize that we can't stop the war until the Straits are fully open. Politics. Today, TSA agents missed their first full paycheck since the partial government shutdown began. The Democrats have again refused to fund Homeland Security. The lines at TSA checkpoints are long. Some airports report wait times of 3 hours. Anxiety sweeps the Jewish community after a violent attack on a synagogue in Michigan. Before that, an ISIS-inspired attack using IEDs in New York City. There's widening concern about possible sleeper cells triggered by the Iran war. Friday, March 13th, 2026.
And that was Varney and Company, Non-Profit News Now. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, motivation.
While they judge you, you grind. While they make fun of you, you double down on your effort. While they sleep, you study. While they keep talking about you, you keep working.
And years from now, when they look at their own life and compare it to yours, they'll look like in comparison to you. Because you will be miles ahead of them.
You've got to focus on you. There's going to be so much noise from the outside world trying to steal your focus, trying to tell you you're not good enough. There's going to be haters all the time on what you're trying to accomplish in your life.
You got to shut them up with your results. The best way to silence them is through activity, through success.
Who cares what they say? Who cares what they think? You've got to be so confident, so committed, so locked in on your mission that you don't even notice them anymore. They blur into the background while you focus entirely on your goals.
When life presents its challenges, it's a call for you to stand up for yourself, to fight back. You're going to be attacked constantly by all these voices around you and sometimes within you. Don't let the negative thoughts or the words of others derail you. Affirm to yourself that you can do it. You can handle it. You're going to get through it. No small obstacle can halt your progress. The strategy is to keep your focus directed inward, consistently working on improving yourself, pursuing your dreams, and building your future.
Your success and achievements will speak volumes, serving as your comeback to any disbelief and negativity.
Always remember, the real victors in life are those who concentrate on their path, building their own road to greatness, undisturbed by the distractions that surround them.
When you can focus solely on you, you stop giving a fuck about what others think. You activate your fuck it button. And this is what you gotta do if you want to be successful. Because the world doesn't give a fuck about your dreams. It's gonna beat you down and take it all away from you if you let it. So you gotta decide that you're gonna stand up for yourself. And you have to grind every fucking day.
You're going to have to lose something where you're trying to go. You might have to give up some friends. You might have to give up some opportunities. You might have to give up some stuff in order to go from good to great. Develop a single-minded obsession with your goals. You have to eat, sleep, and breathe your dreams. Every action, every thought should be aligned with getting you closer to where you want to be.
This process is about discipline. Pushing yourself even when you don't feel like it. It's about waking up every day, starving for success, ready to tackle whatever challenges come your way. And yes, it's going to be hard. People will talk, question, and doubt you constantly, but that's their problem, not yours. Your job is to stay focused and keep your eyes on the prize.
Doing what you hate to do is one of the most powerful disciplines you can develop. It's about stepping out of your comfort zone, tackling the tasks you dread, and facing your fears head on. It's not just about enduring discomfort, it's about actively seeking it out and conquering it.
And all these average people around you won't understand why you're doing so much, why you're trying so hard, why you won't just take a break and hang out with everybody. They won't get it. And that's why they won't ever reach the levels of success you will. Because as you stay focused on the goal at hand and you keep pouring in all this time and effort into that thing, you'll start to see massive returns on that investment.
Normal people will keep judging you and won't ever understand and continue talking shit about you. Don't waste your time trying to change their minds. Just shut them up with your results. Because the best revenge in life is massive success. You prove them wrong with success. They won't have anything left to talk shit about. But in order to get to that point, you gotta have mental toughness. It's easy to do things when you feel like it. But doing something you hate, especially when you don't want to, it's fucking hard. But the more you do it, the more you push yourself to execute when your body and mind tells you to take a break, the stronger your willpower to do hard stuff will become. You build your level of grit through completing hard tasks. They will make you stronger.
The things we resist are the things that offer us the most significant opportunity for growth. By facing these tasks, you find new passions, develop new skills, and uncover strengths you didn't even know you had.
And when you're working, you need to minimize distractions.
In today's world, with constant notifications and interruptions, it's crucial to create an environment conducive to focus.
Managing your time is absolutely essential. Don't just wing it. Plan your days and stick to that plan. Break your tasks into smaller chunks so you don't get overwhelmed and lose your mind. Stay on track and don't let procrastination get the better of you. The real champions of this world, they don't play around with focus like it's some short-term game. They commit to it like it is their lifeline. They lock in on their goals with a laser-like focus, and they don't let go. Not for a day, not for a week, not for a month. They stay dialed in for as long as it damn takes. They treat their objectives not just as distant dreams, but as inevitable realities.
And that was motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, meditation. And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you.
You know, life is complicated. People are complicated. And human relationships, they're really complicated. Sometimes you find yourself in a situation where someone, maybe a narcissist, is manipulating the social structure around you. They begin to turn others against you, subtly at first, then more overtly. And suddenly you're isolated, misunderstood, misrepresented. Recognizing the narcissist's tactics is the first and perhaps most vital step, regaining your footing when someone has turned others against you. Narcissists operate in subtle, often insidious ways. They don't usually come out and attack you directly. Instead, they manipulate perception. They shape narratives, plant seeds of doubt, and exploit emotional vulnerabilities, not only yours, but those of the people around you. Understanding this is not merely about identifying bad behavior. It's about seeing the psychological strategy behind it. Narcissists thrive on control and admiration. To maintain their status in a social setting, they often manufacture conflict to elevate themselves as the center of attention or the victim of some imagined injustice. One of their favorite tactics is triangulation. In this dynamic, the narcissist acts as a go-between, telling person A one thing and person B something else entirely. They might tell someone you said something you didn't, or twist a small disagreement into a narrative where you're the aggressor and they're the misunderstood hero. And if you react emotionally or defensively, that reaction becomes part of the story they tell. It becomes evidence that you're unstable or untrustworthy. This manipulation is calculated. It's not accidental. And it's designed to erode your support system. Another core tactic is gaslighting. The narcissist will make you question your own perception of reality. You may find yourself wondering if you're too sensitive, if you really did miscommunicate, or if perhaps you're at fault after all. Over time, this distorts your sense of self. You start to hesitate before speaking. You begin walking on eggshells. You feel like you're always one misstep away from confirming the false image they're painting of you. That's exactly what they want to trap you in, a cycle of self-doubt and second-guessing. Because the less sure you are of yourself, the more power they hold over the narrative. A narcissist doesn't just manipulate individuals, they manipulate groups. They understand social dynamics intuitively. They know how to read a room, how to identify the most influential or emotionally reactive people, and how to subtly win them over. Sometimes it's through charm, other times through shared victimhood. They tell just enough of the truth to make their lies believable. They leave out context, exaggerate your flaws, or reframe events in a way that puts them in the best possible light while you appear to be the problem. And here's the harsh reality: people often believe them. Not because others are stupid or malicious, but because most people want to avoid conflict. It's easier for them to believe the narcissist's neat, emotionally charged story than to investigate the messy, uncomfortable truth. This is why recognizing the pattern matters so deeply. If you treat each interaction as an isolated incident, you'll keep trying to solve the wrong problem. You'll try to explain yourself to clear up the misunderstanding, not realizing that the misunderstanding was the goal all along. You're not dealing with a communication issue, you're dealing with a deliberate distortion campaign. Once you grasp that, your approach changes. You stop trying to fix the unfixable. You stop taking the bait. You begin to see through the emotional chaos and understand the deeper game being played. But this realization is not easy. It often comes at the cost of broken trust, social isolation, and inner turmoil. It forces you to look at the people around you and at yourself with uncomfortable clarity. You have to accept that some people want to believe the worst. Others simply lack the courage to stand by you. And some, tragically, are too easily swayed by the narcissist's charisma and emotional manipulation. Recognizing all of this is not about becoming paranoid or cynical. It's about sharpening your perception, seeing clearly, because clarity is power. When you see the tactics, you stop being a pawn in someone else's game. You start becoming the author of your own response. Maintaining emotional discipline in the face of narcissistic manipulation is one of the most difficult yet essential challenges a person can face. When someone begins turning others against you, the instinctive response is often emotional anger, betrayal, confusion, the desperate need to explain yourself. These are all natural reactions, but they are precisely the responses that can deepen the damage if not managed carefully. The narcissist thrives on your emotional reactivity. Your outbursts, your breakdowns, your attempts to defend yourself passionately, these all become ammunition for their narrative. Emotional discipline, therefore, is not weakness or suppression, it is strategic strength. When you're under social attack, your nervous system is activated. You might feel like you're under siege, and in a sense, you are. Your reputation, your relationships, even your identity are being challenged. The human brain is wired to react to such threats with intensity. This is especially true when the threat comes from betrayal by someone close or trusted. But here's the danger. When you react from that heightened emotional state, you often validate the very accusations being leveled against you. If the narcissist has painted you as volatile, insecure, or irrational, then any overly emotional reaction you display becomes proof in the eyes of onlookers. Your emotional honesty is used as a weapon against you. That's the trap. Emotional discipline means stepping back from the chaos, even when every part of you wants to charge forward. It means allowing yourself to feel deeply without letting those feelings dictate your actions. You don't suppress emotion, you regulate it. That distinction is crucial. Emotional regulation allows you to remain grounded in reality when everything around you feels unstable. It lets you speak with clarity, act with intention, and protect your integrity without losing your center. It's not about being cold or robotic, it's about being wise. To cultivate this discipline, you must first become aware of your emotional triggers. You know what specific words, actions, or dynamics spark your strongest reactions. Then prepare for them. If you know a narcissist is likely to spread lies, then expect it. Don't be shocked when it happens. That preparation gives you a mental edge. Instead of falling into the emotional pit they've dug for you, you observe it. You step around it. You think 3 moves ahead. This is psychological warfare, and your calmness is your shield. Mindfulness practices, journaling, breathing techniques, these are not just self-help cliches. They are tactical tools. They help you create space between stimulus and response. That space is where your power lies. In that space, you decide whether to speak or stay silent, whether to correct the narrative or let it collapse under its own contradictions. The narcissist wants you emotionally entangled. They want you to be unpredictable, desperate, reactive, because then you're controllable. But when you remain composed, you become unpredictable to them, and that unnerves them more than anything else. Emotional discipline also extends to how you talk about the situation. Be careful not to vent to everyone or seek validation from those who are already under the narcissist's influence. Every conversation becomes a potential liability if you let emotion override discernment. Choose your confidence wisely. Speak from clarity, not from pain. Choose your confidence wisely. Speak from clarity, not from pain. The goal isn't to rally people to your side. That's the narcissist game. Your goal is to act in such a way that your truth becomes undeniable over time. And understand this, emotional discipline is not about denial or passivity. It's about restraint for a purpose. It's about protecting your energy, conserving your dignity, and playing the long game. You're not giving up the fight, you're just refusing to fight on their terms. That distinction matters. Staying true to your values when a narcissist turns people against you is not just a matter of ethics, it's a matter of survival. When your integrity is under attack, it becomes tempting to compromise yourself in an effort to regain approval, to retaliate, or to clear your name. But the moment you start abandoning your principles to adapt to a false narrative, you start losing the very foundation that makes you resilient. Your values are your compass in the chaos. They are the framework that holds you together when external circumstances threaten to pull you apart. The narcissist's goal is not simply to isolate you, it is to reshape how you and others perceive reality. They introduce distortion into the social space, twisting stories, rewriting intentions, portraying themselves as victims or heroes depending on what suits their image.
Thank you. Now, the Cold War.
In the mid-1960s, within the fortified halls of the Soviet Ministry of Defense in Moscow, military planners and decorated generals gathered to review intelligence reports from a distant, jungle-choked conflict. The subject was Vietnam. On grainy black and white film reels, they watched strange, almost insect-like American machines, the Bell UH-1, nicknamed the Huey. These machines darted over treetops, disgorging soldiers into hot landing zones and evacuating the wounded. To the men in the room, titans of a military doctrine forged in the fires of the Second World War, these were little more than flying trucks. They were thin-skinned, loud, and mechanically fragile. A single well-aimed burst from a heavy machine gun could tear one from the sky. A senior marshal of the armored troops, a man whose chest was heavy with medals earned at Kursk and Berlin, reportedly scoffed at the images. His sentiment echoed throughout the Soviet General Staff. The American obsession with these flimsy contraptions was seen as a weakness, a diversion of resources from the true god of the modern battlefield, the main battle tank. Soviet power was not measured in the air, it was measured in steel. It was counted in the tens of thousands of T-55 seconds, T-62 seconds, and the formidable new T-64 seconds that stood poised in East Germany. Their plan was simple, brutal, and seemingly unstoppable. If war came to Europe, this steel avalanche would pour through the Fulda Gap, a tidal wave of armor that would crush NATO forces and be on the banks of the Rhine in less than a week. To the minds of Soviet strategists, nothing could stand in its way. The helicopter was a logistical support tool, a fragile curiosity. It was certainly not a tank killer. This assumption was one of the most profound and catastrophic miscalculations of the Cold War. They laughed at the idea. Soon, that laughter would die in their throats, replaced by stunned disbelief. If you find the hidden history and technological clashes of the Cold War fascinating, subscribe to Cold War Impact for more stories of shocking military innovation. The foundation of Soviet military power rested on a single, terrifying concept: overwhelming mass. For decades, NATO planners had sleepless nights running the numbers, and the conclusion was always the same. The Warsaw Pact held a massive conventional advantage in Europe. At its peak, the Soviet Union and its allies could field over 50,000 main battle tanks against NATO's 19,000. The ratio was nearly 3-1. In key sectors, it could be as high as 5-1. This wasn't just a collection of vehicles, it was a coherent and deeply ingrained doctrine known as deep battle. First conceived in the 1930s and perfected during the war against Germany, deep battle called for massive, concentrated armored formations to smash through enemy lines at a single point. Once a breach was made, echelon after echelon of fresh tank armies would pour through the gap, not stopping to fight pockets of resistance, but driving deep into the enemy's rear. They would encircle entire armies, seize command centers, cut supply lines, and cause a total systemic collapse before the enemy even had time to mobilize its reserves. It was a doctrine of speed, shock, and relentless momentum, executed by a seemingly endless river of steel. The entire design of the Soviet army was optimized for this single purpose. Their tanks were mass-produced, relatively simple, and featured low silhouettes and powerful guns. Their artillery was legendary in its destructive capability, designed to obliterate frontline defenses in a massive rolling barrage ahead of the tank columns. Their soldiers were conscripts, trained for one brutal high-speed offensive. The central plains of Europe, particularly the corridor in Germany known as the Fulda Gap, was seen as the ideal terrain for this strategy. It was the highway for the Red Army's armored legions. NATO's problem was stark. They could never hope to match the Soviets tank for tank. Building and maintaining such a massive force was economically and politically impossible for the Western democracies. For years, the only real answer they had was tactical nuclear weapons. The plan, in its most basic form, was to hold the line as long as possible with conventional forces, and then, as the Soviet tank armies were about to achieve a breakthrough, to begin using battlefield nuclear warheads to destroy them. It was a terrifying, suicidal strategy that risked turning a conventional war into a global thermonuclear holocaust. Both sides knew it was a tripwire for Armageddon. The Americans, in particular, were desperate for another option. They needed a way to counter the unstoppable force of the Soviet tank army without resorting to nuclear annihilation. They needed a force multiplier, a technology or tactic that could allow a smaller, outnumbered force to punch far above its weight and bleed the Soviet armored columns dry. They looked at their own tank forces, the M48 and M60 patterns. They were good tanks, but they were expensive and outnumbered. They looked at their infantry's anti-tank weapons, which were improving but still required soldiers to get dangerously close to enemy armor. The answer they needed wasn't on the ground. It was in the air. The idea did not spring into existence fully formed. It was born from the mud and chaos of the Vietnam War. In the early 1960s, the US Army began deploying the UH-1 Huey helicopter in large numbers. Its primary mission was troop transport, or air assault. For the first time, an entire infantry company could be lifted over impassable jungle terrain and inserted directly into battle. This new tactic, known as air mobility, was revolutionary, but it also exposed a critical vulnerability. As these transport helicopters approached a landing zone, they were slow, noisy, and perfect targets for enemy ground fire. They needed protection. The initial solution was crude, a classic example of battlefield improvisation. Mechanics and armorers in the field began strapping machine guns and unguided rocket pods to the sides of standard Huey transports. These gunships would fly alongside the troop carriers, laying down suppressive fire to keep the enemy's heads down during the critical landing and takeoff phases. They were not designed as tank killers. They were flying bodyguards. But the principle was established. A helicopter could be an effective weapons platform. The results were immediately promising. These ad hoc gunships, armed with rockets and machine guns, gave infantry commanders a form of responsive on-call air support that was faster and more precise than traditional fixed-wing jets. The Army quickly formalized the concept, creating dedicated armed escort helicopters. But the real shift in thinking, the one that would eventually terrify Soviet generals, came with the development of a new weapon, the anti-tank guided missile, or ATGM. When engineers combined the agility of the helicopter with the precision lethality of a guided missile, the modern attack helicopter was born. It was a machine created for a single purpose, to hunt and kill tanks from a position of tactical advantage. It was the direct counter to the Red Army's greatest strength, and it was about to be tested in combat for the first time. The Soviets, focused on their massive tank fleets, were about to learn that the rules of land warfare had fundamentally changed. October 6th, 1973, the Sinai Peninsula. For the tank crews of the Egyptian Third Army, it was a moment of supreme triumph. They had crossed the Suez Canal, smashed through the supposedly impregnable Bar-Lev line, and were now pouring into the desert. Their tanks, Soviet-made T-55 seconds and T-62 seconds, advanced in classic formation, a wave of steel under the hot desert Sunday. Their confidence was absolute. They were executing Soviet deep battle doctrine perfectly against an enemy caught completely by surprise. For the first few days, it was a stunning success. Then, the battlefield changed. An Egyptian tank commander, peering through the narrow vision slit of his T-62, would have seen it first as a speck on the horizon. It wasn't a jet, moving too fast to track. This was slower, more menacing. It was an Israeli AH-1 Cobra, a machine the Americans had refined in Vietnam and supplied to their ally. To the Egyptian crew, it looked frail, like the transport helicopters they had seen before. They trained their coaxial machine gun on it, waiting for it to come into range. But it didn't. The Cobra held its position, hovering just outside the effective range of the tank's weapons. There was no warning, no sound of an incoming shell, just a sudden, catastrophic explosion that ripped the tank next to him apart. The turret, weighing several tons, was thrown a dozen meters into the air, spinning like a top before crashing into the sand. Before the commander could even process what had happened, another tank in his platoon erupted in a ball of fire. And then another. The source of this destruction was a tiny white dot streaking across the desert sky, the BGM-71 Tau missile. Fired from the Cobra, the missile unspooled a pair of thin wires, trailing them all the way to the target. The gunner in the helicopter simply had to keep his crosshairs on the tank, and the missile would guide itself to the point of impact. For the tank crews on the ground, it was terrifyingly impersonal. They were being hunted. They were being destroyed by an enemy they couldn't see and couldn't fight. Panic began to ripple through the tank formations. Their greatest strength, their concentrated armored mass, was being rendered useless. They were being picked apart, one by one, with surgical precision. The reports that flowed back to the Soviet military advisors embedded with the Egyptian and Syrian armies were frantic and filled with disbelief. In Moscow, analysts at the main intelligence directorate, the GRU, pieced together the data, and the picture that emerged was horrifying. During the intense tank battles of the Yom Kippur War, Egypt and Syria lost over 2,500 tanks in just 18 days. While Israeli tankers in their Centurions and Pattons accounted for the majority of the kills, the impact of the attack helicopter was undeniable and disproportionate to its numbers. A single Cobra helicopter, costing a fraction of a main battle tank, could destroy multiple tanks in a single sortie without ever entering the effective range of their guns. The kill ratios were astonishing. In some engagements, Israeli helicopter teams were claiming 10, even 15 tank kills for every helicopter lost. This was the data point that sent a chill through the Soviet General Staff. Their entire European war plan was predicated on a massive, rapid tank offensive. The Fulda Gap strategy relied on unstoppable momentum. But the lessons from the Sinai Desert painted a grim new picture. What if NATO deployed not a handful of these tank-killing helicopters, but hundreds of them? What would happen to their steel avalanche if it was met by swarms of these nimble predators, firing guided missiles from the cover of hills and forests? The tank columns would be bled white long before they ever reached the Rhine. Their momentum would be broken, their formations shattered. The core of their military doctrine was suddenly, shockingly vulnerable. The shock in Moscow was matched by a surge of vindication in Washington. The performance of the Cobra in the hands of the Israelis was the definitive proof of concept the US Army had been waiting for. The ad hoc gunships of Vietnam had evolved into a proven, dedicated tank killer. The data from the 1973 war was irrefutable. It immediately silenced skeptics within the Pentagon and Congress who had questioned the cost and viability of the attack helicopter concept. The result was an immediate and massive acceleration of the Army's Advanced Attack Helicopter program. This wasn't going to be another modified transport helicopter. This was to be a machine designed from the ground up for one mission and one mission only, to survive and kill tanks on a high-intensity European battlefield. It needed to be fast, heavily armored, capable of fighting at night and in bad weather, and armed with a new generation of even deadlier fire-and-forget missiles. The collision in the Sinai had proven the theory. Now, the Americans were beginning the process of turning that theory into an industrial-scale system, purpose-built to dismantle the Soviet war machine. The isolated encounters in the desert were about to escalate into a full-blown technological arms race, and the Soviets were already dangerously behind. The lessons of the Sinai were not just studied in Moscow and Washington, they were weaponized. The attack helicopter was no longer a curious battlefield support asset. For NATO, it became the central pillar of a new defensive doctrine designed specifically to break the back of a Warsaw Pact invasion. The strategy was called active defense, and it was a direct answer to the Soviet concept of deep battle. NATO planners knew they could not create a static, fortified line across the entire length of the Iron Curtain. It was too long, and they had too few troops. Instead, active defense envisioned a flexible, mobile defense in depth. Lightly armed units would identify and delay the main thrust of a Soviet tank attack, channeling the armored columns into pre-selected kill zones. And waiting to spring the trap in these zones would be the helicopters. Throughout the late 1970s and into the 1980s, this doctrine was drilled into every NATO soldier. In West Germany, new air cavalry and attack helicopter regiments were established. Their pilots spent thousands of hours training in the very hills and forests where a real war would be fought. They perfected nap-of-the-earth flying, using terrain to mask their approach. They mastered pop-up attacks, where a helicopter would hide behind a ridge, rise just long enough for its gunner to acquire and fire at a target, and then immediately drop back into cover before the enemy could react. It was a deadly game of hide-and-seek, and the helicopters held all the advantages. Soviet intelligence watched this evolution with growing alarm. GRU agents and satellite imagery painted a clear picture. The annual Reforger exercises, NATO's massive dress rehearsal for World War III, became showcases for this new way of war. Soviet observers would see mock tank battles where entire battalions of American M1 Abrams tanks were declared destroyed in minutes by helicopter squadrons. The coordination was what was most unnerving. The helicopters didn't just fly around looking for targets. They were integrated into a sophisticated command and control network. They received real-time targeting data from ground observers, from J-STARS surveillance aircraft, and from scout helicopters. This wasn't just a collection of gunships, it was a systematic, networked killing machine. The Soviet plan relied on speed and mass, but NATO was building a system designed to dismember that mass piece by piece, with precision and from a safe distance. The pressure intensified dramatically in 1986. That was the year the US Army began deploying its new advanced attack helicopter in Europe. It was a machine that seemed to have been designed by Soviet tankers in their worst nightmares. Its name was the AH-64 Apache. The Apache was a generational leap beyond the Cobra. It was a heavily armored, twin-engine beast built to survive on a battlefield saturated with anti-aircraft fire. But its true terror lay in its systems. Its Target Acquisition and Designation Site, or TADS, allowed its gunner to see and target enemy vehicles from miles away, day or night, in any weather. Soviet doctrine often called for moving tank formations under the cover of darkness or bad weather to mask their advance. The Apache rendered that tactic obsolete. Its pilots and gunners owned the night. Most terrifying of all was its primary armament, the AGM-114 Hellfire missile. Unlike the wire-guided Tau, the Hellfire was a semi-active laser-guided missile. A gunner in the Apache, or even a scout on the ground, could paint a target with an invisible laser beam. The missile, once launched, would fly on its own towards this laser spot. This meant an Apache could pop up, fire a missile, and immediately dive back into cover while the missile guided itself to the target. It could even fire multiple missiles at multiple targets in rapid succession. For a Soviet tank commander, the first sign of an attack would be the catastrophic, fiery death of the tank next to him. The Apache quickly became more than just a weapon. It was a symbol. Its menacing, insectoid frame became the physical embodiment of America's technological counter to Soviet brute force. For the hundreds of thousands of conscripts sitting in T-72 and T-80 tanks across Eastern Europe, the Apache was the monster hiding behind the next hill. It represented a specific, high-technology threat that their training and equipment were simply not prepared to handle. The relentless pressure of this one system began to erode the very foundation of Soviet military confidence. The deployment of the AH-64 Apache to West Germany was not just another move on the Cold War chessboard, it was a checkmate against the Red Army's most powerful piece. Within the grey, imposing buildings of the Soviet General Staff, the mood had shifted from arrogant confidence to a grim, almost frantic urgency. Intelligence reports on the Apache's capabilities were analyzed and reanalyzed. The results of war games and simulations were consistently catastrophic. In every scenario, the initial Soviet armored thrust into Europe was blunted, then systematically annihilated by NATO's helicopter forces. The laughter of the 1960s was a distant memory. Now, marshals and generals, men who had built their careers on the doctrine of the unstoppable armored offensive, were forced to confront a terrifying new reality. Their primary war plan was obsolete. Emergency meetings were convened. Research and development bureaus were issued top priority directives. The entire Soviet military-industrial complex was tasked with finding an answer to the American attack helicopter. They scrambled to develop countermeasures, but they were trying to solve a new problem with old thinking, and every attempt they made fell short. Their first and most obvious response was to beef up their mobile air defenses. Every Soviet tank regiment was accompanied by a battery of ZSU-234 Shilka anti-aircraft vehicles. The Shilka, with its 4 radar-guided 23mm cannons, had been effective in the Middle East against Israeli jets. But it was fundamentally useless against the threat posed by the Apache. The Shilka's radar and guns required a direct line of sight to the target. It was designed to shoot down aircraft flying overhead. NATO's helicopter doctrine, however, was built on avoiding that very scenario. An Apache would never fly high and slow over a Soviet tank column. It would use hills and tree lines for cover, popping up for only a few seconds to fire a Hellfire missile from miles away. By the time the Shilka's crew even detected the brief appearance, the missile was already in flight, and the Apache was safely back behind cover. They were trying to fight a sniper with a shotgun. The next layer of defense was the proliferation of man-portable air defense systems, or manpads. Millions of shoulder-fired SA-7 Strela and the more advanced SA-14 and SA-16 Igla missiles were distributed among frontline troops. The idea was to create a dense, low-altitude umbrella of missile threats that would make it suicidal for a helicopter to operate. But again, American technology was a step ahead. The Apache and Cobra were equipped with sophisticated infrared countermeasures. The AN, divided by ALQ-144, an omnidirectional jammer nicknamed the Disco Ball, was designed to confuse the simple heat-seeking sensors of these missiles. Combined with flare dispensers, the helicopters could often decoy the incoming missile away. More importantly, the effective range of these early manpads was significantly shorter than the range of the Hellfire missile. An Apache pilot could sit outside the manpad's engagement envelope and destroy Soviet tanks with impunity. The foot soldier with his missile launcher would be killed by the very tank he was trying to protect, never even getting a chance to fire. Finally, the Soviets tried to fight fire with fire. They had their own formidable attack helicopter, the Mil-Me-24, known to NATO by the reporting name Hind. Western observers called it the Flying Tank for its heavy armor and impressive array of rockets, guns, and missiles. But the Hind was a product of a different philosophy. It was designed as an aerial infantry fighting vehicle, a heavily armed transport meant to fight in the thick of the battle, suppressing enemy infantry and fortifications to support the advance of their own tanks. It was a brawler, not a hunter. It lacked the sophisticated long-range sensors, the night-fighting capabilities, and the fire-and-forget missiles of the Apache. In a direct confrontation, the result was a foregone conclusion. The Apache would detect the Hind from miles away, fire a Hellfire, and destroy it before the Hind's crew ever knew they were a target. The Soviets had built a flying tank to fight in a knife fight, while the Americans had built a flying sniper to win from a mile away. This string of failed countermeasures had a devastating effect on the morale of the men who would have to fight the war. A former Soviet T-80 company commander recalled the feeling of utter helplessness in his memoirs. "We were told our new tanks were the best in the world," he wrote. "But we knew from intelligence briefings and rumors about the American Apache. We knew it could see us in the dark when we couldn't see it. We knew it could kill us from a distance where we couldn't shoot back. We practiced firing our main guns into tree lines where we thought they might be hiding. It was a useless gesture. We all knew that if war came, we were just lambs being led to a slaughter we would never see coming." The inability of the Soviet military to field an effective counter to the American attack helicopter was more than just a tactical or technological failure. It was a symptom of a much deeper systemic rot. The Apache was not simply a machine. It was the product of an entire ecosystem of innovation that the rigid, centrally planned Soviet state could no longer compete with. It required advanced microelectronics, sophisticated software, cutting-edge materials, science, and a level of systems integration that was beyond the grasp of the sclerotic Soviet defense industry. While Soviet engineers could still build powerful, brutally effective tanks and artillery, they were falling critically behind in the new age of information warfare. This single weapon system placed immense pressure on the Soviet Union. To even attempt to match the Apache and its associated technologies, they would have had to divert astronomical sums of money from an already crumbling civilian economy. It was one of many technological fronts, along with stealth aircraft, precision-guided munitions, and strategic missile defense, where the Americans were pulling away, forcing the Kremlin into a ruinous spending race they could not win. The fear of the Apache in the Fulda Gap was a powerful accelerant for the economic and political collapse that was to come. The helicopter became a symbol of a technological gap that had widened into a chasm. The Cold War ended not with a bang, but with the fall of a wall and the dissolution of a state. The great apocalyptic tank battle in Europe never happened. For years, the question of what would have occurred remained a matter of simulation and speculation. Then, in 1991, the world received a brutal, televised answer. The place was not Germany, but Kuwait and Iraq. The enemy was not the Soviet army, but Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces, an army trained, organized, and equipped almost entirely along Soviet lines. They fielded thousands of Soviet-made T-72 tanks, the same model that formed the backbone of the Warsaw Pact's armored divisions. They employed Soviet doctrine. On the night of February 26, 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, a massive column of this Iraqi armor was retreating from Kuwait City along Highway 80. They were caught in the open, in a perfect kill zone. What followed was not a battle, it was a slaughter. A swarm of US Army Apaches descended on the trapped columns. For the Iraqi tank crews, the experience was the realization of every Soviet soldier's worst fear. Through their night vision systems, the American gunners saw the desert lit up with the heat signatures of running engines. They were picking targets on a screen, utterly detached from the carnage they were unleashing. One after another, Hellfire missiles streaked out of the darkness. T-72 seconds erupted in brilliant flashes of white-hot flame, their turrets blown clean off, their ammunition cooking off in spectacular secondary explosions. The attack was relentless, precise, and completely one-sided. When the sun rose, Highway 80 was a smoldering, twisted scrapyard of hundreds of Iraqi tanks and vehicles. It became known as the Highway of Death. It was the ultimate, undeniable proof. The theory had become terrifyingly real. In the end, the American attack helicopter never had to destroy a single Soviet tank in combat. It didn't need to. Its true victory was psychological. It was a weapon system so effective, so perfectly tailored to exploit the core weakness of its adversary that it rendered the enemy's entire war strategy obsolete before the first shot was ever fired. It forced a generation of Soviet marshals to stare at their maps of Europe and realize that their unstoppable steel avalanche would never reach the Rhine. It would be broken and burned in the fields of Germany by an enemy it could not fight.
And that was the Cold War. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.